anytime you have these like major title changes of change, I think that we're just opening ourselves up to a new way to scale really quickly. And whether that's a way to pay, a consumer experience, platforms that don't exist today that become the consumer preferred way and trusted way to shop for XYZ as a category. I think there's going to be name brands in our lexicon 4 years from now that no one's heard of yet because of their ability to scale so quickly.
So we've been wanting to bring someone from the payments world onto the Tech Leaders podcast for quite some time, because right now that space is popping. It's moving faster than ever between agentic AI, tokenization, and the growing fusion between technology and finance. The way businesses and consumers move money is being completely reinvented. My guest today sits right at the epicenter of that transformation. Cindy Turner is the Chief Product Officer at Worldpay, one of the largest and most influential payments companies on the planet, processing billions of transactions every single day for some of the world's biggest brands. Cindy is a true product leader, a visionary who's helped shape some of the defining moments in modern payments, from the launch of Apple Pay at Visa to driving innovation at PayPal and then JP Morgan, to now leading Worldpay through a new era of AI-driven commerce. This one is a real treat. All the way from San Francisco, California, this is Cindy Turner. Cindy, I thank you so much for agreeing to do this, first of all. You're in Sully, California, and I'm really jealous, but I've been really looking forward to this one. So thank you so much for doing it, first of all.
Thank you very much for having me, Gareth. I really appreciate it. And yes, I'm actually in our San Francisco office today. I brought a team into town and they all took like Waymos to work today. I've been joking. I think San Francisco is living in the future right now. So I've lived here for almost 20 years in the Bay Area, but like the energy of this place is just really back. So the combination of AI, we've got a great mayor that's really engaged in the city. And it's really clean and it's like beautifully sunny skies every day. It's been a really fun place to be the last couple of months.
San Francisco is just the epicenter of technology innovation and so much going on right now. It just must be an exciting place to be. Yeah, that's fabulous. Let's kick off with the big question, Cindy. What does good leadership mean to you?
Yeah, I think good leadership is when the people on your team are empowered to be able to run their own agenda, right? So to be able to carve out what they think the future should look like within the space that they're responsible for, to lay that groundwork, to be able to influence the various stakeholders that they need, and then to be able to own the execution of that vision. What I really like as a product leader is pushing down the decision. So it's not a Cindy product vision. It is, I have 8 or 9 direct reports. It's their product vision. And so really letting them establish where it is that they're trying to go. Here's where they need to make it happen. And then I can help them behind the scenes with some of the execution or the resourcing or a stakeholder that kind of needs to be influenced in a very specific way, but really pushing down that ownership to my directs, who then in turn push it down further within their organization. So the amazing thing about product is it's like the one part of an organization that you can have 100 different people that get to be like GM of their own little world. So someone can be GM of a token product and someone can be GM of the launch of GrabPay in Singapore. They can have their own view of what their success metrics look like and their own view of how to go build that. And so that's what I love to see as I'm a year into this role now. And the organization is just really starting to spin. And we've got such great talent, 2-3 levels down, who are driving their own vision today. So it's really exciting.
That is a fantastic answer. I think the art of sort of imposing that control and that psychological safety in your team so that they feel like they really own it and they're accountable for the outcome of that project, you know what I mean? Or they're part of it. That's difficult to do, isn't it? It's easy to say, but it's hard. It's hard to build that culture of ownership, Cindy, isn't it?
It really is. And you can watch people mature from being a really good individual contributor, product manager, to leading a small team, and then to be able to be the leader of an entire domain and be able to see around corners of what the potential problems are going to be, have a really strong opinion, but also be open and curious to change and to be able to shape that. When you mature into an organization and you start to build those relationships to the people that report to you and the people in your organization, the early days is executing into your vision. But by this point, a year and a half in, it's really just able to curate all of their visions and help them coexist at the same time and help them remove the blockers that they need. That's when it gets, I think, really fun.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. So for the listeners who don't know much about you, I wanted to maybe ask you to give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself. But what I'm keen for you to emphasize is you've worked in payments for quite some time, very experienced in the payment space. But can you talk us through what set you on the path towards working in the payment space?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say I'm accidentally a payments person. I don't even know that I realized this was an industry until I was pretty firmly in it. So I started my career as a strategist. I worked for a strategy consulting firm out of college. I went to business school at Stanford, and then I came out of business school and worked for a private equity firm as a strategist operations person within their portfolio. So I was at that private equity firm after business school. My first job was my first assignment within that. We owned a fast casual Mexican restaurant chain, and it was trying to recover their revenue growth. So it was like, let's get tableside guacamole and like, how can we buy chicken better? So it was a whole bunch of marketing initiatives in the restaurant industry. And then all of a sudden they dropped me in First Data. So First Data was the largest portfolio company at the time, was really at an inflection point of its own and needed a path forward. And so I went from being a consumer products person I've always loved the consumer, but I've also always loved B2B and really complex value chains, and got dropped into First Data, knowing nothing about technology and nothing about payments, and with the goal of just trying to improve that business. So trying to find $1 billion of EBITDA so that business could continue to grow. And that journey of kind of 2 or 3 years embedded within the First Data organization, I loved the industry. It's up and to the right? So find an industry that's 2% of the global economy will always continue to grow. The dynamics within the value chain of all of these different parties that are partners, distribution partners, vendors, competitors in every element of how you go to business. You're managing these really complicated relationships, really complicated exchange of value up and down the value chain. There's very large established companies who really have a mandate and a reason to exist. And then there's startups that do a phenomenal job. There's startups that scale really fast. So it's constantly changing. So that was my intro to payments. I did 2.5 years at First Data on behalf of KKR. And then it was either go to coal mines, which was the next biggest investment at KKR, or stay in payments. And so that was the moment that I was like, I think this might actually be the industry.
I could have been sitting here talking to you about coal mines.
Exactly. So I spent a couple of years at Visa. After that, the most interesting we did at Visa was we launched Apple Pay. So that's another ecosystem play, which was Apple wants payments to work on this phone. Hey, Visa, you as the center of this ecosystem, how can you help make that work? And so it was, let's design network tokenization. Let's figure out how to very, very confidentially, in all of the ways in which Apple always works confidentially, how can we get all of the issuers in the globe, like thousands of issuers, to be able to navigate a new token scheme? How can we get acquirers to be able to carry a token? How can we get merchants to be able to drop a new SDK into their environment that they can check out with an Apple Pay? Worked on the launch of that. And then went over JP Morgan was my next stint. That was really my lessons at scale. I spent 7 really wonderful years at JP Morgan learning how to be part of a client-centric business that is always at its bones, always going to do the right thing. So it is an organization that moves at scale. At the time, we were processing $1 trillion, which was just this immense amount. Now I think they're 2.5, we're 2.5 too. But just the size of the money movement through those businesses, and really the cultural values that start with Jamie Dimon and move all the way down in that organization, that the customer and doing the right thing by the customer is always the most important thing that you can do. So learned a lot in that role. I in mid-COVID got just an itchy foot. Like I'd been sitting in the same chair for 2.5 years at that point, and got a really interesting call from PayPal, and had an opportunity to go run Braintree and Hyperwallet for PayPal for a few years, which was really fun. That was my first time really being a GM, running a business. We were growing at 60+% top line growth. We were powering many of the marketplace e-commerce companies here in the Bay Area. So being their partner, trying to figure out some of the use cases that they needed to solve for as they were scaling completely new business models in ticketing, in food delivery, in the car service type gig economy businesses. So that was really fun. And I thought I could stay there for a very long time. I really enjoyed that team and that role. But I've always had this, like, maybe I go back to the private equity ownership, go do a full deal cycle, and be able to be part of the C-level at an organization. I got this call, which was GTCR is going to carve Worldpay out of FIS, and we're going to make this a $2.5 trillion trillion startup again and try to build this as a standalone business. And so that was a really exciting opportunity, and to be able to do it from the day one of a new co and be part of carving out and standing up a company of this size and scale as its own company.
Wow, that's amazing. You've been involved in some real pivotal inflection points in the payment space. The one that stood out for me, Cindy, and I'm sure you did give us a little sneak peek of it there, but the Apple Pay launch, I should say. At the Apple Pay launch within Visa, that was a big moment for digital payments, wasn't it? Can you tell us a little bit about your recollection of that, what your involvement was, and how did that go? Because that was a big disruptive moment in the payments world, wasn't it?
I was responsible for issuer and acquire enablement. So the teams at Visa had kind of, gotten with Apple in a very private, room and decided, the way that we're going to do this is we're going to store the card within the chip on the Apple phone. And it's going to not be a card number, a 16-digit PAN. It's going to be a 16-digit representation of that PAN, so a network token. So really, it was about inventing network tokenization. We used to go to these major issuers and wallets and partners, be like, imagine you're going to pay with a shoe, and you're going to take that shoe, and it's going to have an NFC chip in it, and you're going to use that shoe at point of sale. So we couldn't ever talk about it being part of Apple or Apple Pay, but we were trying to turn it on in the entire ecosystem so that merchants would be acceptors. I don't know if you can go back in time. I think this was fall of 2014. So September 14 into 2014 was the announcement. And we had Chase, JP Morgan Payment Tech as the major acquirer that was ready to support it already. Uber, Airbnb, and Ticketmaster, I believe, all three were merchants that were part of that launch that were ready to go because we had pulled them through in the process. Initially, under a really strict NDA that we couldn't even really share what the partner was going to be, but then eventually we were able to expose that. So it was really fun. The funniest part about it is every job I've had since, so running acquiring at JP Morgan, running acquiring at Braintree, and running acquiring here at Worldpay, I always have one product manager who's responsible for Apple Pay. So I always find them a couple of weeks in. I'm like, just so you know, like, I literally actually wrote the specs for network tokenization. So I have a lot of opinions on how that goes. So.
Oh, that's amazing. You've had lots of highlights in your career, but I'm sure that is amongst the most memorable ones. So can I ask you, you've moved between traditional finance and sort of fast-moving fintech environments, okay? You've sort of been in both camps. But what are the biggest lessons you've learned about balancing structure and governance with agility and moving fast from a product standpoint, of course?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think JP Morgan, I spent 7 years there. And the first couple of those years, like I remember I would get a meeting put on my calendar that was like controls or issue management. And it was like these scary, like, I just want this to stay in a tiny little box and I need to do what I need to do for it, but I don't want that to be overwhelm all of these other things that I'm trying to accomplish. What I really learned over that journey is that controls and a risk mindset is what lets you operate at scale. So, anytime you introduce manual changes, humans into an environment, you have paper and you haven't invested in automation that is intended to reduce your risk and reduce the long tail of kind of non-happy path things that can happen.
Sure.
That's when you expose yourself to very costly incidents on the back end. And yes, a highly regulated, very large bank moves more slowly, but it's the training of every time you build something, if you spend more time thinking about what could go wrong than just building that one happy path of what can go right, then you're in a position that day one you can start to scale.
Sure.
And that lesson, I think, is one that has carried well beyond the JP Morgan years. We process $2.5 trillion at WorldPay. And when we turn a capability on, we're turning it on for a Fortune 100 merchant, right? And when we do debit routing, we're doing debit routing at Walmart and Kroger, right? So the volume that happens in that ecosystem is really large, and tiny things that might go wrong that a startup can live with errors are just incredibly costly at scale.
Yeah.
And so designing to that from day one, I just think is so important.
Yeah, no, it's very well said. I know you're on a couple of boards, Cindy. You're on one board, two boards, by the looks of it, or you have been. Do you ever sort of interact with payments entrepreneurs? Do you ever get asked for advice on things like that in terms of starting a payments company? Is that something you're involved with at all?
Yeah, I probably am less like the day one genesis of a company, but now I have a network that includes a lot of people
Yeah.
doing that. And I know we're going to come back and talk about some of the AI later.
Yeah,
There's certainly
sure.
some very early startups that I'm spending some time with. The two boards that I've been on as part of my employer. So when I was at PayPal, we were a major investor in PPro. And so I sat on a board seat in representing PayPal in that company. And then currently we're a major investor in a company called Skipify, which is a friction-free checkout tool that I sit on that board. So both of those are scale companies. They've taken investment at this point, they're post C-level investment. But it's a very different business. You realize how much of a startup success is connecting them to scale opportunities and shaping and curating what they could work on to what the highest return of their resources could be. So I really enjoy that. It's very fun. Worldpay is a very open ecosystem company. We have startups that are part of our product set. We're launching open banking in the US and a pay by bank. And the vendor, we went through a full vendor selection for a best in class pay by bank provider in the US. And we went with AeroPay, which is a relatively small provider, but they're ready for the scale that we can bring them. We've been working with them already on a referral basis. And so we have a lot of places that we have companies like that embedded in our solution, and we become their path to scaling. And they're a really important part of our roadmap as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's zoom in a little bit on Worldpay
Yes.
then, because I wanted to talk to you about some of the cool stuff you guys are doing right now. But also, first of all, though, I wanted to ask you, Worldpay, a very well-known brand in the payments space. You've gone in to be the chief product officer. But what is the sort of priorities from a product standpoint? What keeps you up at night? What are you working on at the moment, Cindy?
Yeah. Let me answer that a slightly different way. I think the things that I want us to be best at are like our three real pillars, the kind of value creation. One is scale. We have more surface area from a product's perspective than any other acquirer globally. As I said, we process 2.5 trillion. I think on a transaction basis, it's the highest market share globally in the industry. But just the breadth of our coverage, we do card present and card not present e-commerce. We process in 65 different markets on our own licenses. So 65 markets of local processing. We now have 85 APMs. So not just Visa, MasterCard and traditional card volume, but 85 other ways to pay, whether that's a GrabPay, an Alipay, PayPal, a Venmo, Eurocard in Germany. So all of these non-typical payments that also need to run through the same set of rails. And when we serve those up to a merchant, we want that to be a seamless integration experience, a seamless back-end funding. So we talk a lot about kind of single in and single out. So how do we build to the complexity that is required to be able to serve all of those verticals, all of those markets, but do it in a way that shields the merchant from that complexity so that they can view us as one standard global partner instead of a series of small ones. So, global ubiquitous acceptance and the breadth of kind of that surface area is pillar number one. Pillar number two is really modular services that help the merchant to be able to optimize their payments.
Yeah.
So a lot of those services are about optimizing their authorization. So how can every good customer be able to complete the transaction? A lot of the services, though, are about fraud. So how do I shield my estate as a merchant from fraudsters coming in, from fraudsters doing account takeover? So fraud, security, different tools, the way that you store credentials in a tokenized manner, a network token to be able to get an offlift. How do you keep those credentials up to date? So, the account updater types of tools that allow the consumer to be fully authenticated and have a good credential before they even show back up to shop. And then lots of cost optimization as well. So are we routing this transaction in a way that reduces your cost? Are we funding you as a merchant in a way that you get the currency that makes the most sense for you to be funded in? Are you matching your revenue to your cost so that you can reduce your currency exposure? Are we trying to shield the merchant from having to pay extra currency and FX charges that the networks are exposing? So there's a lot of really creative back-end ways to be able to help merchants optimize their cost cross-border as well. So ubiquitous global acceptance, the highly modular payments optimization feature set. And then the third, and the area that I actually probably like the most is what I call multi-party, or anytime there's like a parent organization making purchases on behalf of many different sellers. So whether those sellers are creators or gig economy or small businesses, or franchisees, right? But they do it under the auspices of a platform that has a single global brand and goes out to market to choose one payments provider, but also as a consumer hook at a brand level. And so all of those platforms have their own needs. So not only are they doing payment processing, but they need to manage seller fraud. They need to manage credit risk associated with sellers. They have regulatory obligations on KYC, KYB. They need to pay out to those sellers. So this series of services that you have to offer when you've got an intermediary like that, marketplaces as well, and to offer, again, very modular sets of capabilities to them. That's where I spend a lot of my time over the next couple of months. A lot of it's could actually be on SMB too. So I'm kind of an enterprise payments person in my training, but a huge piece of what we do is trying to deliver a single, simple product to a small business that lets them run their business and takes payments to kind of a background. So they're not making a payments provider choice. They're making a tablet choice in a small shop or a small restaurant. And so how can we think about one anchor product that does everything that a small business needs to do? So we're probably adding that as a fourth pillar as we're kind of moving into the global integration.
Yeah. So can you talk us through a little bit, like in terms of who your customers are then? Merchants, obviously you talk about SMBs, enterprise.
Yeah.
Is it just those two segments? Who else sort of works with Worldpay and purchases your products?
Yeah, we go to market with three major lines of business. So we have an enterprise line of business. We have a huge history and strength in e-commerce, gaming, travel, airlines. But we also have a huge estate of brick and mortar businesses in the US in the enterprise space. Publicly, I think we process Walmart, we process Kroger, Nordstrom, Macy's, like these huge retailers globally, Tesco in the UK. Less sexy probably than crypto and travel and OTAs. There's a lot of volume and a lot of complexity that we're able to shield those organizations from with good developer experience and good payments tools. That's the enterprise segment. We have a segment that we call platforms, which is exactly what we're talking about in this multi-party. So that's the Toasts of the world. I know you're not in the US, but Toast has become very much like SumUp. Actually, SumUp would be in that category as well. But a platform that has a lot of small businesses, hundreds of thousands of small businesses as their clients. And they're offering a series of services of how to run their restaurant, their SMB, whatever their business is. And payments is a piece of that. So we provide the payment service to those platforms in our platform and integrated business, ISVs, software tools, any aggregation. Every time I pay for a child's sport, right? So I have a kid that plays like both lacrosse and basketball and baseball, and every platform that you go in to pay the club fees, those are ISVs that payments is a component of that. And we're a huge provider to that ISV space. And then the small business, we have hundreds of thousands of small businesses that join us either directly to the Worldpay brand, particularly in the UK, or in the US, we go to market through a lot of bank partnerships. So a small business that goes to Citizens Bank or Fifth Third Bank as their primary banking relationship, and they choose payments as piece of that. That's actually Worldpay that's driving that solution for them.
Absolutely. So obviously it's a very complex operation, to say the least. So with payments becoming increasingly borderless, and you're obviously a global organization, I want to ask you about the security element. So how do you evolve your security strategy to stay ahead of it has to be said, increasingly sophisticated fraud threats that inevitably are going to be ubiquitous? How do you stay ahead of the curve, Cindy, on this stuff?
We have a really good CISO who does this all day long. We have
hire a good CISO. That's the answer to the question.
Honestly, there's an area, a depth of expertise that's required in information security and an understanding of kind of the dark web and various vectors of exposure that is just way beyond like my day-to-day. That is not something that I spend time on. The thing that I do spend time on is where we offer security tools to our merchants as part of our solution. So we have security and fraud as a core component of our product set. And there I spend a lot of time on it. And there it's risk scoring models, tokenization of credentials so that there's actually never a PAN that's in the wild. The risk scoring lets a merchant be able to participate in whether or not they actually want to initiate a transaction, not just rely on the network's acceptance, so that they're not exposed to fraud and chargebacks after the fact.
Yeah, sure. You've mentioned about cryptocurrencies there. So I understand you do have a cryptocurrency element to your services. Is that right? In terms of stablecoins?
Yeah.
Can you talk us through a little bit about that? How does that work?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, we're pretty big in the crypto space broadly. So we have a lot of customers who are all of the big crypto wallets. And when a consumer loads from using a debit card, wants to load funds from their bank account via debit card into a crypto wallet, a lot of times Worldpay is carrying that transaction. So we have had
Really?
our
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
so we've had a role within crypto from the beginning, and a lot of the big crypto clients are very large customers of ours.
So exchanges are customers of yours, like the Coinbases
Exactly,
of this
yep.
world. Okay. Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
But then also Stablecoin, which is kind of a subset of the crypto industry, to me is really increasingly, there's a lot of call to action for it to play a role in the B2B transfers on the back end of payments. So two primary use cases that I think there's a real benefit to using stablecoins to solve. One is for all of these marketplaces where we move the money to our client, which might be a PayFac. If you think about a business that has a lot of small businesses that sit behind them, we're their processor. We get paid by Visa, MasterCard. We make those funds available to our client, who is the PayFac. And that PayFac is then trying to make the funds available to their customers as soon as possible. Small businesses are trying to have money same day. They want to close their terminal at the end of the day and see the money show up right away afterwards. There's use cases in marketplaces. If you talk to an Uber driver about when they get paid, there's a lot of Uber drivers who are taking instantaneous payouts. They're paying 1% of their earnings to push that money into a debit card so they can go fill with gasoline, right? So the acceleration of funds through the value chain in these platform businesses and marketplace businesses, stablecoins is a really good fit for. So if we can do instantaneous transfers and we can make those funds available while we're still holding them in a US denominated account, it's a huge advantage to some of these platform use cases. The second one, of course, is if you can avoid FX. So again, to use some of these examples of platforms, there's some platforms, particularly the creator platforms, where the majority of their providers and creators are sitting in Southeast Asia or relatively small countries and currencies.
Yeah.
And those providers, if they're getting paid in their local currency, they have to take a 3-ish%, like 300 basis points hit in FX in order to get paid. Yet the cost to them, if you think about that provider's cost, their cost is actually frequently buying ad spend within like a Meta platform. So their cost is denominated in US dollars and their revenue is coming from US dollars and the US consumer. And the same example could be said in the UK or Europe. And every time they have to make a round trip of those dollars into their home currency, they're losing 3 to 4% of the top line. So if we can hold all of those funds in a stablecoin on their behalf, they can spend in dollar and they can receive in dollar, but they don't need to have a US bank account to do that. Those are the places we've exposed it so far. From a payments perspective, technically it's in our funding. We can fund in stablecoin and then we can pay out. So we can expose payouts in stablecoin.
So do you just use stablecoins like on the Ethereum network or something like that then? Or have you done anything on the Bitcoin network?
No, we're just using stablecoins in those two cases.
Right.
Yeah, just stablecoins, yes. And we do have some partners behind the scenes. We don't operate our own wallets, for instance. So we have some partners on the wallet side. But yes, we can either fund in stablecoin or we can facilitate the payout to stablecoin from our clients who are moving money that way.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. Be Digital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. Be Digital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology license management and data remediation and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, Be Digital have just developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to bedigitaluk.com to find out more and get in touch. I wanted to ask you about agentic commerce, okay? Something you've spoken about in the past. For those unfamiliar, what does that term mean and how might AI agents transform how consumers and businesses transact in the future?
Yeah. First of all, thanks for starting at that point is what does agentic mean? At its very highest level, it's the idea that an agent is purchasing on behalf of a consumer with their instructions. I joked, I did a LinkedIn post a couple months ago. I have a wonderful nanny for particularly when I travel. And she's been my agent for a really long time. And we do it
I
outside
love
of
that.
network rules. She has my own Chase card in my name in her wallet. And there was a day she texted me and she was like, hey, like a bird poops on the car. So I'm going to take it to get a car wash. And then I'm going to run to the grocery store because you need like milk and juice. And I was like, I've been living in an agentic world for a long time and it's wonderful. Welcome to it, everybody else. And she's an autonomous agent for me, right? And that she's making those purchasing decisions. As soon as we do this at scale with an AI-based agent, we need to
I love that analogy, by the way. You've done this before, haven't you?
Yeah. But we need to protect our merchants and their exposure to potential liability for erroneous purchases, right? So whether it's true fraudsters or just accidental purchases, the merchants, as they're thinking about how they can expose their inventory into an agentic world, an agentic shopping world, how can we do this in a way that remains safe for them? I'll just give a kind of another top line. So we went to our client event. We host this big rethinking event in Europe every year. We had 250 of our clients, largely in the enterprise space, $1 trillion of payment volume represented in the room. And we did a survey of how disruptive do you think agentic commerce is going to be? So as discovery from a consumer moves into an LLM and the consumer asks ChatGPT for X item or asks an agent that's using an LLM behind the scene to do their closet replenishment or book their trips, how disruptive do you think this is going to be to your business? Asking our clients. They were like 85%, 9 or 10. I think this is going to fundamentally disrupt my industry, the consumer experience, the value chain, like how my company makes money. Very worried about it. Second question that we said of 250 people, how many of you have tried an agentic transaction so far? 4 people out of 250 had actually initiated one. Perplexity's had them for 3 or 4 months. OpenAI's had them for 2 or 3 weeks. So this is still very, very new. And you've got these payment geeks in a room not having even tried it themselves, right? So we're very early in this. And then the crazy question, the third question was, how many of your companies have a strategic initiative at a C-level to develop your approach to agentic, so to the consumer moving discovery into an LLM? And only 30% actually were. And I'd say that that's resonating as I'm talking to a lot of merchants is there's a fear, like this is going to fundamentally change everything about my business. I'm very worried about it. I haven't tried it yet myself. And even though I'm worried about it, we're not really working on it because we've got a lot of other stuff going on. So that's the moment that we're in. We're very early, but all of these parties are trying to kind of land grab of what can agentic mean? What role can I play in it? For the people who are listeners who are spending much time in LinkedIn, following agentic, there's a new protocol announcement like every single week. So we had Google announced a protocol, Visa has a protocol, MasterCard has a protocol, OpenAI did a protocol. So we have all these different kind of protocol announcements, which is they're trying to say this is how I believe the industry should work, but really this is how my LLM is going to work, or this is how my card can play in it. Our view from a Worldpay perspective is, again, we want to normalize this for the merchant. So we want to be able to have one set of tools, one set of APIs that is wrapped around our regular payment processing that lets the merchant, what does the merchant need to be able to do differently? First of all, they need to expose their goods into an MCP. That's a little bit outside of what we do typically, but we can expose those MCPs within our environment.
Yeah.
Second, we need to give a signal to the merchant of, is this a trusted agent? So is this an agent that we believe has good intention and not just a fraudster? Because the fraudsters are all agents too. So the fraudsters are coming in, they're going through guest checkout, they're trying to take over accounts. That is also a bot, that is also an agent. And so we have to be able to discern between a good agent and a good actor and a bad actor. Secondly, even within good actors, fraudsters come in and use those too. If I have a good actor and this is an OpenAI agent, how do I know that when a card was stored in that agent and given the ability to spend, the right set of fraud authentication was done at that moment? Did I bind a token to that agent with a established way of assessing whether or not there was an authentic consumer that was tied to that card? The storage of that credential, again, network tokenization, back in my history there, but network tokenization is a critical component of that. Yeah. And then the most interesting is going to be once an agent checks out, how can the merchant know that the agent is buying the thing that the customer wanted them to buy. So that's a new API, right? The merchant today, if they get shopped as a guest checkout, the assumption is that the thing being purchased was in line with what the person wanted to purchase. But if an agent went and did that purchase and there's a mismatch, the merchant's liable today. So how do we help protect the merchant from knowing and being able to validate what the consumer asked them to buy? And that's probably the area that needs to mature the most over the next couple of months.
Tokenization is going to get so important when we have autonomous agents representing our interests left, right, and center. Do you know what I mean? Because we're not going to know which ones are real, which ones are authentic or not, otherwise, are we? So, yeah, I hadn't really thought about that. How important that is.
Yeah.
It's crazy,
and in the early days, what we have is we have agents shopping on a website still. So an agent is mimicking a human in a guest checkout environment.
Yeah.
I actually think eventually it will mature to an API to API, so an agent to agent based transaction, right?
Yeah.
Where the merchant exposes an agent that validates digitally the agent's instruction from the consumer, and that becomes the transaction. You don't really need a website if there's no human on the website, right? But if you think about if you're a merchant,
so bizarre.
You want to establish brand, you want to establish customer loyalty, you want to be able to upsell, you want to be able to hold that consumer information so you can come back to them later. You need to be able to catch that consumer in the LLM, sell to them, but think about how to influence and drive consumer loyalty to you as a merchant without having this traditional front door of an internet that they came to shop in. So, we're it's Wild West still, but it's a really, really interesting space. Yes.
It's coming thick and fast, though, isn't it?
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
We can't be too far away from the majority of people having their own AI avatar agent who does shopping for them and stuff like that. It's crazy. Have you got any other sort of tools that you use regularly on the agentic AI side of things, Cindy?
Yeah, we're working with OpenAI, and we're already pushing into our dev center their APIs. So one of the things I really like about OpenAI and their approach is it's multi-acquire from day one. So the assumption is that the merchants will integrate into their MCP, expose the inventory, allow for those purchases to happen in the ChatGPT environment, but the transaction will flow through their regular processor. So they're really just exposing that endpoint and saying, here's where to send that transaction to. And so then the processor can do everything else BAU to the merchant. Because if you think about these huge merchants, they have a treasury operation that needs to be able to do reconciliation, to close the books on the second of every month, to be able to make sure they get paid. They don't want to view this as like a net new front door. They need it to flow through the back end that they have set up at scale. So it's a new discovery process, and that discovery process has a friction-free consumer authentication happening in it, but that needs to flow through a set of rails that is consistent with the rest of their processing relationships.
In terms of governance and the ethical element of it, okay, in terms of AI deployment in a company like Worldpay, what sort of principles guide your approach to using AI responsibly within the Worldpay's product set?
Yeah. So, there's probably like different areas of kind of both risk of exposure and like where we embed the AI. So we have both for internal tools, right? So we have our own instance of an LLM that we can use internally. The critical aspect of that is we don't contribute information back into the source LLMs. It's actually multiple LLM day one. So you can choose to use the OpenAIs, you can choose to use any one of 4 different LLMs behind it, but we don't contribute any information back into their source code. And so we're able to leverage the best of it without exposing any of our data from a risk perspective. We have that. We also have Microsoft Copilot. A lot of workflows are really able to benefit from a productivity standpoint with just embedded meeting note taking, to-do lists, a lot of code checking and workflows for an engineer. We also use AI in our product, so embedded within the product. That's largely in the big data aspects of our product. So we have AI in our fraud tools. We have AI in our retry. So if a transaction fails and you want to go retry it, we have AI that's anticipating where to send that transaction next. And then we also are using it in some of our routing optimization, being able to anticipate where the lowest costs are going to be embedded within our products. And then when you think about the consumer using the AI, that's the last kind of element that I think is the least mature still. But if the consumer is using AI, then you're in an agent-based transaction. I don't know that the processor needs an AI tool. They really just need an API that can accept that transaction.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that we're tracking really closely and working with all of the same parties. And
yeah, of course. So let's look beyond payments now, Cindy. Okay.
Yeah.
Outside of, I'm talking business, society. What are you most excited about in terms of the proliferation of AI technology in any manifestation, agentic, generative AI, just in terms of innovation generally around AI, true AI? What excites you the most?
I mean, I just love the amount of change that's happening in the industry right now. And disruption allows for opportunity. So I was talking to an analyst yesterday, and he was saying that he thought like Visa was going to be the winner of agentic. And I was like, I don't know that I believe that. I actually think if someone in particular, if one of the LLMs embeds a pay by bank payment method in the US where pay by bank has struggled to scale, and we have a really friction-free pay by bank embedded within that LLM, all of a sudden you have the opportunity for that to take off and become the way to pay in that type of an environment. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm not sure what's going to be disruptive, but anytime you have these like major tidal changes of change, I think that we're just opening ourselves up to a new way to scale really quickly. And whether that's a way to pay, a consumer experience, platforms that don't exist today that become the consumer preferred way and trusted way to shop for XYZ as a category. I think there's going to be name brands in our lexicon 4 years from now that no one's heard of yet because of their ability to scale so quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I've got to ask you the inverse slant on that question, Cindy. What are you most, concern's the wrong word, what should we be fearful about? What can go wrong?
I'm worried about some of our merchants, right? So, I sit in the merchant seat a lot. I haven't actually really ever worked for one. They're very nervous, right? If consumer loyalty is to the brand of the good getting purchased and discovery moves to take any category, right? So women's clothes, pantry items, like any one of these categories. If what the consumer cares about is making sure that the physical good that they buy is from a brand that they trust, and their discovery moves from walking into Nordstrom and then shopping their curated selection to having an agent that curates a selection on their behalf, there is a real concern that the retailer and the merchant, the person who's doing the selling, their value add of inventory curation becomes less important. I want to represent them and help them really push themselves and push their inventory in the right way into those LLMs in that moment of change. That's probably the thing that I think we're in the most risk, is that you're going to have new scale platforms start to pick up those same goods, and the revenue share of who's actually doing the selling is going to redistribute.
I've got to ask you about this one, Cindy. Jobs displacement. Anyone who's used AI can see straight away that this is going to take people's jobs. It's absolutely inevitable. As with most technology innovation, going back to the Industrial Revolution, generally there's a hit on the amount of jobs created by any industry, and then it generally recovers, and then you see a net gain in jobs because the technology has just elevated the industry generally. Is this another iteration of that, in your opinion? Or do you think this is different?
I think it's certainly another iteration of that. It'll take different jobs and it'll shapeshift in a very different way. And look, these are people too, right? So, highly conscious of that. So roles in an organization like call center and QA teams and technology, like that feels scary, and that does feel very risky. Where am I an optimist? I think that the thinking is like the AI only knows what it knows. So if you either create knowledge or your role in the ecosystem is to add intelligence to decision sets, then AI can make you more productive, but it can't replace like the core function that you're doing. I think I'm most bullish on those types of jobs. A lot of it is leadership roles, product roles, GM type roles, trying to set the thought leadership, the communications and PR jobs.
Yeah. The roles with more of a human element, I think you're explaining there, aren't you?
Yeah, they don't need to write anymore, but like, gosh, if you can actually differentiate yourself in terms of being able to influence the talk track, like that is so critical.
Yeah. But did you envisage any new career paths will emerge? Well, I'm sure some career paths will emerge, but are there any new career paths that you think will be particularly prominent over the next couple of years? AI ethics, for instance. Have you got any?
Yeah, you're outside of my wheelhouse. I don't spend any time on that. I mean, I was actually interested. I read an article that was like, there's actually an entire kind of sub industry right now of these people who maybe used to work in a call center. They're now going into these kind of data farms and validating pictures. So they just spend all day. Is this a picture of a truck? Yes, no. Here's a map. Is this like a stop sign? Yes, no. So the human validation of the best guess by the AI tool to train the model. So this model training, I don't think that's a long-term industry, and it sounds like a terrible job. Um, but like, who even realized? Like, I didn't even realize that was a job right now, right? But it is, and it's happening at scale. So yeah, I mean, I think the people who are the trying to, very customer centric in what they're trying to solve for. Like, I want to solve for a friction free consumer experience of trip planning, of closet, management, of any one of these kind of sub industries, the pantry management. I think that there are going to be scale brands in those spaces that, I'm really excited to see what they can do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just casting your mind back to I know you got a long way to go, Cindy, don't get me wrong, but I just wanted to ask, if you were to have a chat with your 21-year-old self, okay, someone who's starting their journey, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to that person?
Interesting. Yeah, when I started my first job out of college, it was as a strategy consultant in Boston. And I knew I loved the consumer. Like, I've always loved the consumer, but I thought that meant working for a consumer product company. I think the thing that I wish I had recognized sooner is that you can be consumer obsessed and work in the technology that enables shopping and enables the commerce. And that's both a more profitable sector than the CPGs themselves, but I think also much more dynamic and faster moving space. I didn't really know what tech was. Like, fintech wasn't really even a thing. Product wasn't really even a job function. I stumbled my way into those, but I wish that I had appreciated that you could spend all day driving consumer technology and consumer experiences, but do it for a technology company that was driving that instead of for a CPG itself.
Yeah, fantastic. No, I love that. That's brilliant. So just very quickly on product. So in terms of running a productive product team, okay, what are the core fundamentals? What advice would you give to, say, an entrepreneur about spinning up and running a really effective product team? What are the core pillars that you have to implement in order to achieve that?
Yeah. So first of all, you need a really strong product ops team. That is a muscle that is incredibly valuable. You can't run a product team at scale without a good product ops. It's not necessarily a skill set that I think is the strongest skill of someone who views themselves as a great product leader. The great product leaders are innovators, and they're dynamic, and they're really good at thought leadership, and they're really good jumping into podcasts with people and talking about the future. They're not necessarily really good at RAG status and tracking and PDLC consistency. And you can't run a good product organization without doing that really well too. So product ops is critical. We've run this transformation since I joined 15 months ago, 18 months ago in Worldpay. We did people, product, process, and then the platform. And so we have made massive change against each one of those four pillars. So from a people perspective, it was like, to your first question, how do you lead? Putting the right people in charge of a domain and then giving them autonomy to go make the decisions, but support where they needed it. So getting the right leaders in place. Process is RAG statuses and tracking and really good road mapping tools and communication to all of your stakeholders about what's getting done, what's stuck, what's coming when. So you have to be in a position to communicate that. It's so many different levels in an organization, externally, internally, within the teams, within the engineering orgs. You have to be able to share that in dashboards and reporting tools. And there's some wonderful software that does this process really well now. We implemented AHA, and it's transformational. No one sits around in PowerPoint making a roadmap document anymore. So we just look at AHA, we view it there.
Is that AHA?
AHA exclamation point, actually.
Okay. We'll have to put a link to that in the show notes. But thanks for sharing that. That's really useful.
Yeah, having a really good road mapping tool. And I've had prior organizations use Monday. So there's other ones out there too. But yeah, you need a good, consistent way of being able to track what you're working on. A good product organization is transparent at all times about how they made the decisions they made, how the work they're doing is going, if it's going to hit the milestones that were previously communicated, and then where we plan to go next. So there's an infinite ideas in the roadmap of what we could do. How are we deciding what we're going to go do next? And so being able to communicate that at the right altitude to your stakeholder with the right timely information and transparency is just so critical. So the process of product, and then the product itself, picking a couple big bets. How do we stay on top of agentic? How do we decide what to build? How do we think about global expansion and modularity of our tools? That's the stuff that product people just love doing, and that's kind of within ourselves that we do it. But influencing that within the team, having an opinion on a couple of things, making a couple of those bets. And then platform, look, Worldpay is the series of a bunch of prior acquisitions, and our platforms it wasn't just built, but having a view of like how we pull that together, how we deliver a best-in-class developer experience and best-in-class backend for the merchants and shield them from any of the complexities in the scale of who we are as a processor.
Fantastic. That is a brilliant answer, by the way. So let's finish on this, Cindy. We always ask our guests to recommend a book, or it can be, if you're not much of a book reader, it can be a piece of content, just something you were inspired by recently.
Okay, I'm going to definitely go podcast. So the Acquired podcast, I am absolutely, thoroughly obsessed with it.
Acquired, okay.
Acquired is the name of the podcast. And then they have a second one too, I think ACQ2, something like that. But it is absolutely phenomenal. The Acquired one, they do these 4 to 5 hour deep dives on a company.
Ooh, wow.
And like how the company runs beginning to end. So they did one on Meta, they've done a couple on Google, they've done one on Microsoft.
Oh, wow.
And it's what problem are they trying to solve? How have they scaled? How have they evolved? They just did a series on Alphabet. And then the last one of the series, I mean, we're talking 12 plus hours of content here on Google, and like what's made Google, how Google's first growth, like the best product that was ever invented was search, right?
Yeah.
And then how they scaled beyond that, even like some of the Waymo, things that they've done. But then this last chapter, which was a 4-hour chapter, is on, the role Google can play in AI. So they were the talent incubation of all of the current LLMs, and then the role that they can play going forward. It is the single best education that I've ever had. And so I deeply, deeply recommend the Acquired podcast. Yeah.
Well, that is some recommendations, Cindy. We are absolutely going to have to check that out. We'll have to put that in the show notes. But look, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, I've had such a blast. I mean, you clearly live and breathe payments, which is so inspiring. You're clearly passionate about what you do. So thank you so much for sharing your story with us, Cindy. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Gareth. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
This was one real avalanche of insights, a proper masterclass in how payments have evolved and where product strategy fits into that bigger picture. There were so many moments worth highlighting here, but it's really hard to look past Cindy's take on what really makes a great product function tick. That was just gold dust. She talked passionately about the power of product operations, which I thought was really interesting, and then broke down creating a good product function into 4 Ps, which I thought was genius. Product, staying close to innovation and evolving customer needs. People, making sure the right talent is in the right roles. Easier said than done. Platform, building a strong technical base and a great developer experience. And finally, process, having the right tools and roadmaps in place to bring it all together. You get those 4 working in harmony, and you've got a blueprint for a truly world-class product organization. I thought that was just fabulous and great insight. So a huge thanks to Cindy for joining us. And thank you so much for listening. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. Until next time, thank you so much for tuning in to the Tech Leaders Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, and I shall see you on the next one. This episode was brought to you by Be Digital. Be Digital support leadership teams to optimize cost and get more out of technology investments. Be Digital and the team have unrivaled expertise with technology, license management, and data remediation, and are therefore perfectly positioned to help prepare organizations for AI technology capability. And on the last point, Be Digital have developed a cutting-edge AI readiness assessment, which provides tech leaders with a platform they need to make well-informed decisions about AI adoption strategy in 2024 and beyond. Go to Be Digital UK to find out more and get in touch.